everyone, we're back with a very special episode. We are joined by a legend, Rick Carson. How you doing, Rick? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is
Good.
awesome having you on, honestly. Um, I will say this, we had about, I don't know, almost an hour before we hit record just talking about random stuff, and I'm still just like in awe about a lot of the stuff. The amount of information like that you have in that brain is absolutely incredible. So I'm very excited to kind of pick your brain about a few things and whatnot. So I mean, I think before we kind of get into kind of either Jerry or Blink, whatever, for you, how did you kind of become interested in like audio production and engineering and all that kind of stuff? Like, how did that all start for you?
I grew up in Michigan, and I always loved music, and being so close to Detroit. Detroit was Motown was very inspiring to me because it was very homegrown. It was something that a lot of people in Detroit are still proud of to this day.
Mhm.
They call the city Hitsville. And so the fact that some people could really, put together some musicians in their basement in front of some microphones and go and change the world from my hometown was something that I always thought was really, really cool. So,
Mhm.
from there, I was interested in recording. And then I got into music that I liked myself. And, when I started looking at the backs of records, I started seeing some names get repeated over and over, and one of those names happened to be Jerry Finn. And that led me to being, what I would consider a big fan of his. And I've just spent, a large portion of my life just, you know, interested in how he went about making records and what he thought was cool.
So at what point did you decide to start the Make-Believe Studios? Like at what point did you decide this is going to be the career, the trajectory? This is what I'm doing now.
Well, the studio started a few years after what I would consider the decision to make this my career trajectory. I went to college for this when I was 16. At that point, I was the youngest person who ever went to Full Sail.
Mhm.
And I, graduated from there. I went and, messed around in the post-production industry a little bit. So, like, I was in Prague working at a studio where we did stuff for Saturday Night Live. And then I came back and I was in Chicago and I did a lot of voiceover and ADR work up there. So, like, if you ever watched the movie The Dark Knight, the first scene where everybody's wearing the Joker masks, I recorded all the ADR for that for everyone besides Heath Ledger that's wearing a Joker mask. All those actors were there because they filmed that in
Oh
Chicago.
wow.
After Dailies
Yeah.
came down, did the ADR. So, you know, um, just like shit like that. Like I was an engineer, and then I started becoming a record maker, myself. I in Chicago, I went and started working with a dude named Brian Ziski, and Brian Ziski would be like the first foray. And like, don't get me wrong, I had my own band, a pop punk band, and we had made pop punk records and stuff like that. But Brian was the first person that I really sought out for what he was doing in what I would consider this genre. So
Mm.
Brian had, there was a band called The Academy Is. Do you remember that
Ah,
band?
yeah, I love that
You
band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. So Brian made their first record, the Academy
Oh.
EP, one that was called The Academy Is, and that was the name of the EP, and then that turned into the name of the band. You
Mm.
know, um, he made that record in a basement on one of those rolling 16 track recorders,
Oh,
and so
wow.
like from that, I he went and worked with some other bands, one of them being the Hush Sound and stuff. So like I went and started hanging around his studio, the Galleria Carpet, and from there very quickly I was just like, okay, I want to go make records and work on music. And, I have focused on that ever since, so Make Believe came after I left Chicago. I left Chicago. I moved to Omaha, and I was in Omaha for about a year before I officially started up Make Believe. And, I've been doing that ever since. And it started when I moved to Omaha. I had 8 microphones and 5 mic stands. Now it's a uh, I mean, it's wild to say this, but it's currently a roughly just shy of 5,000 square foot facility, but we're expanding, and we just picked up another 11,000 square feet, so it'll be
Wow.
yeah, just shy of 20,000 square feet. That will be
And
dealing
That's
with out there in
insane.
Omaha, you know.
So you're saying that, looking at the back of all the CDs and whatnot, or cassettes, depending on what year we're talking about. Um, so who were kind of some of your biggest influences, kind of when you started to piece together the names for these albums? Where did you start to get your influences with?
I remember recognizing that I thought that for a while, if a pop, and I don't want to call it pop punk, I'm going to call it pop rock. But if a pop
Hmm.
rock record was going to be really special, it had,
Yeah.
and this is fucking 13-year-old me. I'm sorry, Chris and Tom, but it had a Lord Algie on it, you know, which I know that's not their name. I know that I know, how to pronounce their name now, but back then I didn't. And, I just saw that, these Blink-182 records sounded amazing, and it had a Lord Algie that was involved, and that, these Green Day records sounded amazing, and it had a Lord Algie involved. And there
Yeah.
were other fucking records that were cool, but they weren't that fucking cool. They weren't as cool as someone who, was getting close to Serban and Max when it
Yeah.
came to this pop sensibility and markability of the sound. And what's interestingly, is like then you start looking at like these other things, because then I started looking at other records that those people were doing. And then I started to realize, no offense to you, Chris and Tom, is that, Chris and Tom are fucking amazing at their job. But if Rob and Jerry aren't there and somebody isn't doing that job that can do that
Mhm.
job well, then there isn't a fucking song, you know? And then
Yeah.
that led me to really being like, okay, well, now I know like the difference kind of what I should expect out of, and you always hear these things like, you learn what a record producer is, and you hear fucking Max, and you hear fucking, Jerry and George Martin, and all these people are described as the fifth Beatle or the fucking fourth member of Blink-182 and shit like that. And, ultimately you start to realize like where these roles are as like a young burgeoning person who clearly is going to spend every penny and second of the rest of their life on this shit, and for me, it's hard to do this job because like, when I decided at the ripe age of, 15 years old that I wanted to be a record producer, and this is a conversation that I have with, someone that I love and cherish very much, David Bendeth, someone who I would consider my mentor and a very famous producer in his own right, famous for producing, Paramore's Riot and a bunch of Breaking
Hmm.
Benjamin records and stuff like that, an absolutely talented man. I told him when I went into the gig, I had to define what the job was before I was willing to take it, before I was willing to dedicate my life to it. What was Jerry Finn's job? What was George Martin's job? And what the definition that I came to, I believe
Mm.
doesn't exist anymore. And some people still can pull it off, but the majority of people who are doing this job, and definitely the people who are entering into this job, it's a very hard place to get to. But what I believed a record producer was a third party intermediary that was hired by not only the record label, but also the artist to produce a product that was a, faithful, creative, reliable vision of the artist's intent, while also a sellable product for the label to produce that hopefully came in on time and under budget.
So like the
Yeah.
middle, like almost like the middle meant to connect to, yeah.
It,
Yeah.
the guy who stood, right between the actual vision and the product on the shelf, you
Yeah.
Yeah.
know, and um, it was very interesting to like figure out who Jerry was and to see what he was able to do. And, even as like I learned and knew these things, like I saw them again and again. Like when Jerry went and worked with, bands like I mean, there's some stuff that Jerry did that most people don't talk about, like, but like Morrissey's a perfect example.
Yeah.
But he took Morrissey, who was like on like what I would consider a downward slope, and
Mm.
he influenced it with what he was doing in the world, palm mutant guitars, and he brought it into this world that like made it attractive. He made that product sellable by bringing what he brought to the table very much in that instance. It didn't hit me until one day I was sitting at a fucking airport.
Mm.
And I was sitting at an airport and I was with this guy and we were having a conversation. Just not a guy I know, but like I'll start a conversation with anybody. I don't give a shit. We have been having this. We're almost like 2 hours into this thing. We're having a
Yeah.
great conversation.
Yeah.
So like I'm sitting at this airport, and the guy looks at me, and goes, "Hold on a second, give me a second. I want to check the scores." And he goes up and he starts looking at college football scores. And we've only been talking for like 15 minutes, but I'm not a college football guy, you know. And this guy, from what I can tell, doesn't seem like he'd be a college football guy. And for some reason, I just had, the inkling to ask the guy. I said, "Do you actually give a shit about this stuff? Like there's something here with college football that
Hmm.
interests you, And he said, "Yeah, man, I don't really care too much about the players, but I love the coaches." And I said, "What do you mean you love the coaches?" He said, "The coaches, the players, they come, they go. They're gone every 4 years, 3 years sometimes, maybe one if they get hurt. But the coaches, you get 20 years with them where they spend every season trying to put together the right chess pieces and puzzle pieces together to inch their way forward to a championship while fighting against a budget and a board. And it's more of a chess game than it is the football game that happens. So I'm not really too interested in watching the 15 minutes of people standing on the sidelines, but I'm interested in seeing the scores at the end to see how the coach fared, you know? And I said,
Mm.
that's really fucking interesting because that's the music industry in a nutshell.
Yeah, 100%. That's actually such a I've never saw it like that before too. And it's just like producers, it's the unsung heroes, right? It's the quarterback or the lead singer that gets the praise. Meanwhile, yeah, that's actually interesting to when you put it into perspective like that too. So for
Yeah.
you, Rick, too, like when you how I personally, found you was through um Reddit and YouTube and stuff, and you started making kind of a series more focused on, I guess recreating the tones and kind of diving deep of what did Jerry or Blink use on Enema? What did they use on Takeoff? What did they, um, so how did you come to that, idea to make it? Was it just like, hey, this is a void that's not, or this is like a subject that no one's talking about and it's interesting? Was this something that was just like on board, I want to do? What was like, how did you come to it? Because it got a lot of traction, right?
Yeah, so it's always been kind of a conversation, that guitar world is a big part of my world. One of my best friends in the world is a guy named Nick Berger, and he'll probably hate me in the world for saying this, but I'm going to say it out there. He flies very under the radar. He is the guitar tech currently for Pierce the Veil, but he's been the guitar tech for Mayday Parade, and he's been the guitar tech for Brief Carolina, and tons. I mean, he was with Mayday Parade for fucking what, like close to a decade, and he's been with Brief Carolina for almost a decade now. And I mean, this dude was my roommate, like when I was running Makebelie. And, him and we used to work pretty heavily with a band called The Ready Set. Jordan over at The Ready Set. Nick became a guitar tech then, and he's been on the road, just killing it and crushing it. So we've always just loved guitar tone, and some
Yeah.
of my best friends in the world, like it's about guitar tone. And for me, I love Jerry Finn's records and I loved his guitar tone. And you know, there was this thing where everybody talked about like, how do you do this, or how do you do that? And we had gone after it in different ways, like definitely when I worked on that record for A Day to Remember, like they were definitely like, let's Jerry Finn, and
Hmm.
Yeah.
I, you know, I at that point hadn't done as deep of, like, I knew things, but I hadn't done as deep of a dive as I even did when I went down doing these tones. Like now I'm
Mm.
at the point where like I listen to microphones, I listen to speakers, like I'm trying to like really
Yeah.
capture this shit as closely as I possibly like. Someone captured it before. I believe that someone should be able to capture it again. And then also, I think it's really cool to fucking get hit up by people who are like, hey man, I'm the current guitar player for Avril Lavigne and I use your Enema of the State tone live. And it's just like, that's cool. Like that makes me happy. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So um it's nice to, go down that path. And I, now want to do more of them, but really it just came from this thing with me, Nick, my buddy Neil, and A Day to Remember, just like loving Jerry Finn's tones. And one day I was like, fuck it. I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna full commit, go after recreating that Enema tone. And,
Hmm.
you know, there we were. So
So for you, like what was kind of the like what stood out to you the most when you were looking through and dissecting and analyzing? Like what kind of stood out the most for his sound overall, or even production kind of style overall that he would have been doing that you were just not aware of?
Jerry's sound was very, very meticulous, but very, very real. There's this whole conversation between drum samples, not in any of these productions, but just drum samples in general. And people talk about augmented versus replaced. Do you augment the drums or do you replace the drums? And you can actually see it.
Yeah.
I have a video that's on our YouTube where I just recently sat down with Chris Baseford, who makes Nickelback records, and I said the internet wants to know, does a kick drum that you record for a Nickelback song actually make it into the song? And he said, yeah, it may be tucked in there, but it's in there.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like Jerry did a very, very good job of understanding what to do to augment a production to make it sound larger than life, but never go too far past the point of it not sounding real, you know? Um, and I think that is like a masterclass in and of itself.
Hmm.
You can overproduce just as much as you can underproduce, but really,
Mm.
Jerry had this vision for what this stuff was supposed to be that I feel like the rest of the world agreed with.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
video, I think, I forget who it was. There's somebody that took, I believe it was What's My Age Again, or it was one of them, and it broke it down. And the amount of little things that are in there that you would have had no idea that were in there, but makes it that larger than life, like you were saying, without overproducing it. But it is really cool to see kind of a breakdown of all of it and kind of what was, from the clean to the crunchy tones to the lead tones to like the backgrounds to everything that went in it. It's really, really cool. So from the Enema sound to the takeoff sound, for you, Rick, was there anything that was, and guys, I'll link the videos to Rick's stuff below because it's you got to check it. It's especially if you have time on your hands, it's fast. It really, and I don't use this word, it's fascinating. But it's so cool to see. But from Enema to Takeoff, because people kind of use them kind of hand in hand because they came out, relatively obviously right after another. But was there anything different that was done on those two records between the two? Like, was there anything that maybe Jerry learned that, oh, I'm going to do this on this record that set it apart that you learned?
Everything was different. I think that the numbers were at like, I think that Dude Ranch had done like less than 250,000 copies at that point, right? Like it was like
Mm.
150,000 copies or some shit, you know?
Before Enema, like before
Yeah.
like Enema would have started. Yeah, like
Yeah.
it was. They're like for San Diego punk band big, but
Yes.
yeah, not
Yeah.
massive, obviously. Yeah.
And it was a
Exactly.
real explosion, wasn't it? Of like
A- abs-
popularity.
Absolutely. And I, talk about this to, put it in perspective for another band. Currently I'm dealing with the Terry Manning estate, and I've just been learning tons about Terry Manning's career. And one thing that's interesting is the record Eliminator for ZZ Top. And I think that Eliminator is a very clear example. Eliminator is Enema of the State when it comes to that band. And ZZ Top was a band that could sell 750,000 copies pretty regularly before Eliminator. Then Eliminator came out and they sold like 116 million copies or some shit. Like just crazy numbers, you know? Um, so yeah, like the stuff that Dude Ranch was doing well. They were a big San Diego punk band, but like
Mm.
no one expected it to be what it was when they went in to make Enema. And you could
Hmm.
see that, Enema, they did the drums at Mad Hatter Studios. Do you
Yeah.
know about this?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Mad Hatter is a studio that was owned by Chick Corea, the piano player. So beautiful studio with this beautiful, huge Neve console, like one of the biggest Neves in a private studio in America. Absolutely
Mhm.
gorgeous. And you could tell that Jerry wanted to use that Neve to record fucking drums. And
Yeah.
when they went back to do uh Wendy Clear and Mutt or whatever, or no, Wendy Clear and whatever the last one was, the two songs that sound different. The party song,
Anthem.
no, I don't think it's Anthem.
No, it's Party and
It's
oh,
the two that Jerry mixed. Wendy Clear is one of them.
Might be Party Song.
Yeah, there were two songs that they came back to do afterwards. And so like they went to Mad Hatter, they did the drums for pretty much the whole record. Then they went down to fucking San Diego. They did the majority of the record down there on an Atari Status console, like a way lesser console with a lot of Jerry's outboard gear, but like a studio that was just cheaper that they could get the time to be in and spend more time. And then when they went back to do those other two songs, they went and did drums at the Neve room, but they couldn't afford. They clearly, you could see as a young record producer the conundrum that fucking Jerry found himself in. Do I go record the drums on the Neve, or do I try and save the budget to hire Tom? And he went and recorded the drums on the Neve and he mixed the songs himself.
and that was the last. I'm still trying to I can see if I can
You
find it
just
after
pull up
this,
the
but I know what
It
you're
was
talking
part. It
about.
was Party
Yeah.
Song. Yeah, it was Party Song.
Is it party? Yeah, it's Party Song and
Yeah.
Wendy, right? And
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
tell because they sound totally fucking different,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I always use, it's interesting because Jerry got famous ultimately for his work on mixing Dookie. Like that's
Yeah.
the thing that
That's
brought him into this limelight, you know. But
Mm.
if you go and listen to Wendy Clear versus What's My Age Again, you will see where Jerry's at when it comes to great mixers. And by the self-titled record, Jerry had figured out some fucking shit, dude. Jerry is a much better record or a much better mixer when it comes to the stuff that he did on that stuff. But
Mm.
yeah, like like during that era when he's mixing Alkaline Trio and shit like that, like he fucking was doing way better mixes than what he did, Wendy Clear on that
yeah.
record.
So for and I know there's obviously a lot of guitars, there's a lot of amps. What would you say for the Enema and the Takeoff were the main kind of go-to amp, go-to like effect, go-to guitar? If you had to,
So if we're gonna hop into the guitar thing, I don't know how crazy gnarly long we want this to be, but for the internet, for everybody at home, I always start this conversation with Rob Cavallo. Rob is definitely what I would consider a huge influence on Jerry and where a lot of Jerry's sound and tricks started and continued.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that Jerry definitely expounded on them, but they started with Rob, and Rob had a pair of Marshalls that were modified by a dude named Martin Golub. And these Marshalls, I've actually made a video about them recently, but the two mods were called the Crunch mod and the SE Lead mod, or the Lead SE mod.
Mhm.
And the Crunch mod was a cascaded mod, which pretty much took two tubes and ran them into each other so that they created more distortion in a line. Where the Lead mod actually added a whole ass other tube into it. And Rob was getting these tones by blending these two Marshalls together, or these Marshalls together with an orange, or these Marshalls together with a high watt, but he was blending these fucking Marshalls in with things. And
Hmm.
I started referring to them as the top and the bottom. Um,
Mm.
Billy refers to them as Pete and meat. And really, what it comes down to is that there's one that is high end, the top end energy that's poking through, and then there's
Hmm.
Yeah.
one that's thick, and it's
The
the low
bass.
end
Yeah.
energy, and if you see that session and what Jerry showed up with, he
Mm.
showed up with a matchless, he showed up with an orange, he showed up with a high watt, he showed up with his white Marshall JMP that had
Hmm.
the crunch mod in it. And I'm pretty sure that that was like what he intended to go to war with on that record, was probably something like the crunch mod JMP up top and the high watt on the bottom, or maybe another Marshall on the bottom. But Tom showed up with his own amps, and Tom actually had a pretty interesting thing that he was doing, which it took me forever to figure this out.
Mm.
I had to stare at so many 1990 fucking 4 and 96 fucking live footage and watch the actual colors of LEDs change on the amps when he hit his foot switch. But he had his
Yeah.
foot switch set up with a Y cable going to both these bitches. A dual rectifier and a JCM 900.
Yeah.
But he had it set up that when he would hit the foot switch, if he went to his distortion channel, it
Mm.
was the distorted channel of the rectifier, and it was
Hmm.
the clean channel of the JCM 900. And if he
Yeah.
went to his clean tone, it would be the clean sound of the rectifier, and it went to the fucking distorted sound of his fucking, you know, Marshall.
Marshall.
And
Yeah.
he fucking had talked about this very plainly in interviews, but since he, no offense to him, is aware of what's going on, but not super in tune with what I would consider the finer details of it, they were cryptic as shit. He'd be like, yeah, I use my clean sound for my dirty sound for my clean, and they're turned all the way up. And it's like, well, there's some half truth and some real truth to that. And it took me like a long time to figure out what was what. And he's absolutely correct. Like when he goes to his clean sound, right? I
Mm.
mean, when he goes to his clean sound, he's on the dirty channel of his fucking Marshall, and the volume's turned up because the gain is turned all the way down, because that's the only way to
That's
still
so,
get
yeah.
sound like a clean sound.
Yeah.
But when he goes to the dirty side, the gain is fucking turned all the way
Cranked.
up on the
Yeah.
clean channel, and the volume is just set to blend it. And that is how he gets that like slight gain out of the top of that. So it was like a very interesting thing for me to like really try. And when I talk about the whole like, when did I actually start trying to dial that in? It was during that time period. That's when I was like, okay, I sat with all of his cryptic words and I fucking went through all of those videos, and I was like, okay. And I think that fucking Jerry went and saw these dudes play live and heard how they sounded live. And clearly people like dug this band,
Mm.
and you heard what happened on Dude Ranch. And Dude Ranch, for what it was, like, I'm not trying to shit on Mark Trombino, it's not the same sound by any means.
No.
When it came to that sound, I'm curious on like what experimentation ended up, but ultimately what I found is that there's hands down footage of Tom having those amps in the control room. And I think that Tom, being Tom, and they're probably being budget and time considerations, and the fact that people liked what was happening already, that they decided to throw those amplifiers up, and I bet you they listened to that White Marshall, and I bet you they listened to other stuff, but I've gone down that rabbit hole myself, and I really believe that it is Tom's amps that actually made it on to that record. And I think that
Hmm.
the thing that makes me believe that the most is the amps that ended up on goddamn Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, which is, the amps that ended up, clearly we have that photo, classic photo of Jerry standing in Conway in front of the Silver Jubilee in the Marshall dual rectifier. I think that, they used Tom's amps on Enema of the State. So Jerry Finn said, I need to go get my own version of those amps. And he went out and got the best Marshall 900 that he could possibly find, which is hands down the Silver Jubilee. Everybody in the Slash knows it. The guys at the chop
Yeah.
shop, like that was the best. And then he got an awesome dual rectifier, you know? And it's interesting to go down, like, figuring out where Jerry's dual rectifier sits in the whole serial number range and stuff, which I won't get into here. But I will say that there's a lot of people who believe that Rev Fs and Rev E's and Rev C's and all of this earlier dual rectifiers are like the ones. But for me, the Rev G with chicken head knobs, which is what Jerry had, which is what Tom had, which is what Wes Borland had, is like
Hmm.
the rectifier for me, man.
Yeah. No, 100%. Like as soon as you see like that specific one, there's so many, like I went down that rabbit hole a couple of years ago about all the different serials for rectifiers, and it's actually crazy how many like people just think that, oh, do rectifier done, but it's like there's different versions of it. It's unreal. It really is. So for I think if we kind of stay on the same kind of thing with the amps and stuff, guitars. There's been a few guitars that I'm just straight up talking about Enema and kind of takeoff. So for the cleans he would have used probably that
So that
PRS.
PRS, so there's a PRS violin guitar, and this is an incredible guitar. It's about this thick, it's super thick, and it's completely hollow. It's not one of those things where it's got like a center block that runs through it like on a 335. This
Yeah,
thing is hollow, and it's like when you hold it, it feels like you're holding like the most fragile cello you've ever held. It's currently owned by my good friend Alex from the band A Day to Remember, and just holding it, is scary. And we used it, and it sounds incredible. Sounds just as cool as you think it would. But yeah, that guitar, and then there was a deluxe reverb that is in the photos. And I believe it's that, those two, that 70s. I can't remember if it's a deluxe or a twin, but it's a silver face 70s reverb. And I think that that's the majority of the clean sound for that record. And then the guitars for that record, there's a lot of toss up as far as what that is. There's a Telecaster that was used on that record. I know that Tom's Les Paul was used on that record. And I believe that some of Jerry's guitars, including, one of his Les Pauls, was used on the record. But
yeah.
from what I can tell with the tone, and a lot of people want to go and talk about this, I think that if you go and download the Enema tone, more so than even the Take Off Your Pants and Jacket tone that we've made, that the way that an invader hits that tone makes it work better.
Interesting. Yeah. So um and then from that to take off, we see Tom with that Gibson, Gothic Explorer, I think it's what it's called, which is interesting in itself because it only has the one pickup in it,
Yeah, so
which
that Gibson Gothic Explorer is used on multiple records by Jerry. You can see it in the AFI videos as well, and that guitar had a very specific job.
was it just for like the backup crunch?
It
Was
was
it?
for
No.
it was for octaves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Mm.
from what I heard, is that guitar was used for octave guitars, and that it had that EMG, so they wanted those
Yeah.
octaves to pop.
Interesting. Okay.
Yep.
Because I know Tom has one as well, so there
Yep.
would have been two. But it's interesting because even if you go look on um, Reverb, eBay, anything, I've never seen a Gothic Explorer with just the one pickup, one volume, and they're like it's a straight solid body, so like you can't just make another pickguard and cover it like you would a Strat. So it's interesting because those must have been one-off specifically from
You can hear it in the
Gibson.
parts too. You can, well, yeah. So I think they were one offs as far as the, or they got them filled as far as that hole goes.
So Gothic Explorer, obviously, you were saying, obviously some Les Pauls.
From Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, as far as I can tell, that was the era that, he had found the Klon by then, which I pointed
Yeah.
out in my video. I believe that he had found the Klon by then. And,
Yeah.
him and Joe got Klons, and from what I heard. And, that was like these high output pickups are dead to me. Like I don't want to like you can use them live and shit, but I don't want them in the studio. Like we're using Gibson pickups. And
Hmm.
that was something I always found interesting to Jerry for like a dude who like loved modded amps like a ton. He like did
Mm.
not really like modded guitars. And even like the conversation this week on the Blink-182 forum, like every time that someone wants to devolve, into this whole, well, Jerry, said this, or somebody said that Jerry said that. Show me one of Jerry's guitars that had other pickups in it. I mean, you have
Yeah.
that whole
Mm.
list there. How many of those guitars on that list that it says replaced with Seymour Duncan pickups?
No, everything is stock. One of my favorite things about this gear channel is just the opportunity to talk to people, like yourself and like others that, were around during this time and recording. And, all of them kind of say the same thing that like, this was like 20 plus years ago. I don't remember exactly, verbatim what was done on everything. And Um, so a lot of people have to, understand that. I think if you hear somebody say, "Oh, this was on this," or "This was done on this," it's like they could be wrong, and and to always keep that open, well, I guess open ear too for certain things, right? And I that's just kind of my kind of take on it. So
No, no, and
it's a
I
long
think
time ago.
I think you're absolutely correct. And when I go down these challenges, I was recently asked, about one of these challenges if I like reached out to somebody before I started doing it. And the answer is no, because ultimately I found a lot of people's actual firsthand experience to be there to be less than reliable.
Yeah,
And the things that are reliable to me are photos that I can find, videos that I can find, and then what does it actually sound like?
hmm,
And,
Mm.
you know, I'm more interested in, when it comes to guitar tones and stuff, people are fucking creatures of habit. Like if they find something that they like, they'll literally go buy that shit and then start dragging it around the world with them. So like if you want to fucking know more about a guitar tone on a record, figure out the rig that they toured with after the record you know
yeah,
uh,
that's so true. No, that's
yep.
that is so true too. Yeah,
You want to figure out what producer brought to the table, like oh well, they ended up with the exact same fucking record, but now they've got a whammy pedal. It's like, okay, well, clearly they went down the whammy rabbit hole and started doing some shit like that. And I've always been able to, like, kind of put these things together in a way that makes sense for me, but I've just spent a lot more time on certain subjects.
kind of going to so after takeoff, Tom obviously did box Car Racer. And from my understanding is, it was Jerry and Tom in the room. And I'm not sure if it was Tom or if it was Jerry, but one of them said, I don't want to do anything that would have been on a Blink record on this boxcar record. So they use different amps, different guitars, different tones, a lot, quite a bit more acoustic stuff as well. So your take on the boxcar racer album?
Yeah, so I've heard the same thing, and I think that when it came down to guitars, I think that was a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah,
But yeah, I mean, they're not finding another Taylor, and they're not fucking finding another fucking Les Paul, you
just for
know.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that they went down there and like, no Les Pauls, we're only using Duesenbergs. Like, like I don't think that's what it was by any means, but I think that there was a very clear and conscious effort to not use Mesa Boogie stuff. I think
Yeah.
that,
Mm.
Tom as well as Jerry, had become well known and, for lack of a better word, pigeonholed into being these Mesa Boogie guys. And
Yeah.
I think that Boxcar Racer was the time period where they're like, we're not doing anything that happened on Blink-182, and that includes Mesa Boogie. And that's the big thing that I can find being the thing that didn't happen down there. And with that, though, there was a fundamental shift because for Tom, it was just for Boxcar Racer, and it wasn't even for the live shows. He went back to playing rectifiers live, like in the videos. He was playing rectifiers and Stratocasters in the videos, actually. So it was like all the Blink-182 stuff, you
Yeah.
know. But on the actual recording, there was a fundamental shift that stayed with Jerry forever. And
Mm.
that was that the dual rectifier got put away for forever, as far as I can
Hmm.
tell. And I have done my, due diligence down this road. And, you know, I'm still trying to find another one. There may be one instance that I think we've found where there was a dual rectifier that was pulled up. And I think it
Mm.
was actually with Blink 182. And it was like super surprising to see there. Um, but it was Jerry's dual rectifier.
Hmm.
And you can tell because it was the 2-channel one. But
Yeah.
you can, I mean, even in the fucking all the house footage and the footage at, Conway and stuff like that, he's not even carrying around his 2-channel dual rectifier. It became the diesel. Like the diesel
Yeah.
became the bottom amp. And that continued on for Alkaline Trio and all these other records that he did. He used the diesel and then he would switch out the top. And the only other, I'm trying to think, I don't remember if Sing the Sorrow happened before Boxcar Racer or not. Was that after?
I think it was after.
Yeah, that may be the only record
I think it
that
was after.
had a dual rectifier afterwards, but that wasn't Jerry's dual rectifier. That was um Jade's dual rectifier, the rectifier, and then it was Jerry's White Marshall, the
Mm.
JMP with the crunch mod up top. So, and you can see that even then, Jade walked away saying, "Oh, you got to have vintage, modded Marshalls." And then Jade went so far as being one of the biggest guitar players to endorse Nitro Amplifiers, a very little known amplifier company that was designed by
Mm.
Martin Golib, the dude who did those mods in Jerry's amps.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
So he,
Interesting.
yeah, he walked away from that shit, not thinking about his rectifier anymore. He walked away from it thinking about that white JMP.
Yeah.
As I said, you fucking look at what people do after to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
it's honestly true. So then we get into like the self-titled part, and that's when I think, it's definitely
well, let's
um
go back to Boxcar for one
okay.
second.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So Boxcar is when this fundamental split happens, and also when I think a production shift happens. So like before on Enema and on Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, I believe that there was a clean tone, and I believe that there was a dirty tone, and I think that there may have been slight variations on these things because of the guitar that you put into them,
Mm.
and maybe the presence of a chorus pedal, and if it was the most butt hair of a chorus pedal and a compression pedal that happened
Yeah.
on the tones,
Yeah, yeah.
but and that would have been more towards the Take Off Your Pants and Jacket era, like there I swear there's a little bit of chorus on the Adam song, clean guitar
There
tones,
is. Yeah. I I
yeah,
Mm.
I I would agree with that for
yeah,
sure.
so there's like these slight, production shifts that are happening where like they're exploring a little bit more. They've got more time. But
Yeah.
Boxcar Racer, even though for as scattered as it was, I think that from what I've heard about the production process, one, it influenced how the record ultimately ended up sounding and made the record sound very, very cool. And then two, influenced Jerry Finn and Blink-182's production for the rest of their lives. So one is that like they went in there and they didn't have a ton of time to make this record.
Mm.
And so they
Yeah.
set up, a small drum set and a big drum set, like a little trap kit, and then a fucking like full on, we're gonna do the thing. And then they set up, pretty much what we would consider the big amp rig, which is the
Yeah.
multiple amp for blending thing, which was pretty much the diesel on the bottom and other amps got thrown up on top. And then,
Yeah.
pretty much acoustic guitar land, which ended up being like some small combos thrown in front of those microphones as
Yeah.
well. That's pretty much, and they were just like, okay, that's a small one. And they'd fucking walk out there with whatever the fuck they were holding and go fucking do it.
Yeah.
And that's how I heard like the franticness and the pace of that session actually went down. I can't say for sure if that was that what it was like. I wasn't there, but from what I understand, they were pretty much, saying, let's do this. But when it came to that big amp rig, they were changing that top head. They would, some songs, from what I heard, it was a Dumble,
Mm.
and
Hmm.
you can actually see Jerry did have a Dumble overdrive special. I have footage of it. I've got photos of it. It was teal. It was the color of Tom's guitar.
No way.
Um, yep. There's also that's the first place that I've heard of the Zach Wild being used, and the Zach Wild ended up being, what I would consider Jerry's top outside of the White Marshall. Like if you look at a lot of the footage from the house, you'll see the majority of it is the White Marshall or the Zach Wild 2204 or 2203. And then there's also like a Comet and an Orange and some other stuff that get thrown up top, but you'll always see that fucking diesel's down there on the bottom. Um, and then, you know, so I heard about um the Dumble, the Zach Wild got used, and then a couple other things were utilized as well. I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but I'm pretty sure that was like when he started getting into like boutique stuff. So he had things like the
Yeah.
comp,
Mm.
you know, um, and that clearly went on when they went to their next production of making the self-titled record. Like what happened in there influenced, I think, Jerry and Blink 182 more so in their recording process than a lot of people know.
Mm.
Because I think that Jerry just got into it. I think that Jerry realized, like, hey, if I use the same thing down here, I can keep everything relatively thick, but I can pick different textures and different parts, um,
Yeah.
instead of, trying to focus on. And I think that everybody just got bigger. They had more time, man.
Yeah. So when they got to self-titled, or untitled, they it was a much bigger production. Like they obviously rented a house, there's all the videos and photos, but they had uh plethora, I guess, of guitars that they could choose from, and a lot of them were their own. Like Tom used his own like red boxcar guitar a lot. Um, he had like the custom shop, natural Strat that he used too, and then there was the Gibsons and the Telly Juniors and all that stuff, and then again all the amps that were there too. So, when you were saying going from boxcar to this, it really went from almost like a smaller time that's quick, let's get it done, to this where you could pick anything you want. And like they were saying in those interviews, they would try it with different guitar strings. Did that make a difference? They tried it with a different microphone placement, different amp settings. So that one has always, I mean, self-titled is probably my favorite album of anything, but
Mm.
just the craziness that would have went into that, from how much was trial and error just to see what would sound the best. So it's not an exact sequel to Takeoff, if that makes sense.
You'd see it from
No,
like the cheater videos as well, where they would go through, like tons of amps, tons of guitars, and you'd even see Mark with like a vintage synthesized bass, for always. It's like, yeah, let's try this, and it works, and it made it its way in. But
Hmm.
I think it's going back to what you're saying. They had the time to go through and play with all these things and just spend every moment like trying every like possibility, which is
Yeah.
so super cool.
yeah, and I think it was cool because while some of that shit I think was definitely worth it as far as the sonic exploration goes,
Mm.
it's interesting to look back at it now, and there were times when Travis would talk about them spending forever trying to get a drum sound, and they
Yeah.
had this luxury where that really was like the pinnacle. That's where it peaked. You know, ever since then, we lived in the Napster era, and records have gotten cheaper. And you know, they talk about what was the budget? $1 million to make that record in that house, right?
I forget what it was, but something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know,
Unreal.
I'm
Yeah.
assuming that hopefully they had the studio and they didn't just rent it for that. But you know, it's interesting watching that footage too, because you can see like as time moves forward in their timeline of stuff, like what gets important. Like when they show up to do those guitar overdubs, they no longer have all of the guitar amplifiers that they had at the house. They show up with the fucking Diesel and the Zach Wild.
Mm.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah.
and they're talking about like, well, we got like 2 days for Roger Manning to come in here and do keyboard parts. Like they're clearly running out of time, and of course they were in a position where ultimately, if they wanted more time, they'd find more time. They
Yeah.
pushed the thing back if they needed to, but they clearly in some of that footage thought that like this is they had to work hard to get it done, but they were going to get it done, and they did, and they turned out those records, and we loved them, right?
Yeah. So in a world where we have digital amplifiers, right? Like we have the fractals, we have quad cortex, like there's so many of them. Um, if you were asked, okay, so Rick, I just want to make a Jerry Finn preset. I know there's everything under the sun that he would have used. What would you say would be kind of the go-to, amp, speaker, and effects? Like what would be that scene? Like a simplistic kind of scene that would replicate it as best as possible, would you say?
I mean, it depends on what era of Jerry Finn that you're going for, but in my mind, I think a Marshall and a Mesa Boogie, a dual
Yeah.
rectifier and some sort of Marshall up top. It really helps if you do have a modded Marshall. The mod that he had performed on his amplifier, did a lot to take a JMP and make it more like a JCM 800. So if you have an 800, you're not super far off, which is why you
Hmm.
see Jerry using 800s later on. He's using that Zach Wild 800 a ton.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
really, the only big difference between that Zach Wild 800 was that they went through Zach's favorite 800 and they found the component tolerances of it, and they kept closer component tolerances to those tolerances, which were slightly off from stock. And they also used 6550s, which were a bigger tube that had a little bit more headroom and was a little bit cleaner. And that makes a lot of sense to me because Jerry was getting a little bit more crunch and top end from that diesel rig than he was when he was utilizing the Mesa Boogie. The Mesa Boogie
Yeah.
he tended
Mm.
to keep relatively dark and rely on the top end from the Marshall, which is why, unfortunately, I think that for me, take off your pants and jacket is the quintessential tone. And don't get me wrong, there's some great tones on Boxcar Racer, but there's
Mm.
something about the way that Silver Jubilee squishes when you palm mute it that is like the
Yeah.
perfect sound in my brain. Like when I think of Anthem Part 2 and that second guitar part that comes in, the way that squish sounds when the palm mute is happening is like, what?
Chef's
Yeah,
kiss. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like what I'm
Yeah.
fucking looking for. And there's some examples that are close from the
Hmm.
Diesel and what I believe to be the Diesel and um the Zach Wild going on Boxcar Racer,
Yeah.
but it's never as close to perfect as it is when I listen to that Silver Jubilee. So
So, really, where for you being obviously a lot of physical, I quickly just touched on the digital amplifiers and whatnot. Where do you personally see studio production and guitar tone capturing and whatnot going in the next 5, 10 years?
well, I think it's getting interesting for guitar tone. I think what just happened with McGee kind of blew out the whole world, with people now searching for Tascam 424s and 428s and stuff like that to be utilized as pretty much guitar pedals. I think now anything in the world can be a guitar pedal. I don't think that,
Yeah.
really only
Yeah.
people are looking for like tube screamers and clowns. They're gonna like be hyped to run their fucking goddamn guitar through an old VCR and shit. Like, whatever is cool as long as it's fucking cool. And I think that when it comes to like what we're looking for out of guitar tone, isn't that.
Mm.
Unfortunately, if you're trying to compete with Jerry Finn or Rob Cavallo and Doug McKean, you got to learn how to fucking record. I don't think that
Yeah.
you're gonna get a better tone from a modeler. I think that when it comes to things like fractals and NAM, I think the one thing that's really, really exciting is now, clearly we're all homies who love this stuff. And we've been what I would consider roundabout friends for the past couple of years now.
Yeah.
But we've never had a chance to have this conversation. And it seems like you guys just found out that the Dumble was used on Boxcar, you know?
Yeah.
And I've known that for a couple of years. I got photos, I got the settings of it, you
Oh
know?
man.
So like I've known it, but the chance of either of us, like one, my boxcar racer video is not out because I don't have $100,000 for a Dumble overdrive special. And I got a
Yeah.
buddy who's willing to let me borrow one, but I haven't had a chance to arrange going to it because I don't want to be responsible for it being shipped back and forth across the country.
Yeah.
you
Uh,
know um but the fractal and NAM and all of
mm.
these things now allow you to, as well as everybody else who watches this video, as well as myself for the past couple of years, to go and explore that overdrive special and how it can be blended with a diesel to create tones that sound like Boxcar Racer.
Hmm.
Makes it way more accessible, doesn't it?
It
Which is
does.
a good thing. I do have a question.
Oh yeah, go
With
ahead.
with Jerry Finn being like a bit of a purist, he loves the all the kind of boutique pedals and all those kind of things. How do you think Jerry would have approached the digital landscape now with music? Do you think he would have embraced things like
It's a
Kemper
good
or
question.
Cortex, or do you think he would be one of those people that would continue to be a purist and only use valve amps, cabinets, boutique pedals?
I think that he would have embraced it on the live side and shunned it in the studio side the way that he did a lot of other things.
Yeah,
I think that he clearly could see the merit in it. Probably, I think that he would say, having four dudes that you need to truck around all this stuff versus one rack that you can roll yourself. It
yeah,
minus the half a semi that you need for like an actual backline of all of your rigs and your backups and all of that stuff. Like I think he
yeah,
absolutely would be able to see the merit of what they bring to the live touring community. Plus, I mean, Jerry loved vintage guitar amplifiers. The less vintage guitar amplifiers that get stolen or broken on the road, the more for all of us, right? So
True. So true.
Jerry didn't really go down what I would consider too far into a digital hole. The
mm,
majority of his stuff was like he loved analog effects, and the people that he came up with seemed to, love analog effects. So, while he had a few digital pieces, like I remember he had an EMT 250 reverb and stuff like that.
yeah.
For the most part, it was just like straight up digital, or I mean, straight up analog gear.
So we'll kind of maybe wrap it up a little bit. But so for you, what advice would you kind of have for young audio engineers maybe that are, trying to document or recreate kind of iconic sounds? Like what, because I'm sure you had a lot of trial and error yourself in creating some of the stuff. So if you can go back and do it again, what would you have changed?
Ooh, well, those are two different things. Going back, one, I would lose weight before I make the videos. Because when I go back and watch those videos, I'm 50 pounds heavier than I am right now, so that's a little bit hard. But besides that, I think that the the big thing that I would do is you got to use your ears and
Mm,
you got to go ahead and spend the time to do the due diligence to think outside of the box. And there's tons of people that you can reach out to. Um, who have some information, but what I found is that a
Mm.
lot of this information to not be, what I not that I want to say that it's wrong, but time
Mm.
happens, in between when you receive this information and when it actually, like, I've never talked to Joe McGrath, I've never talked to Jerry Finn. I think that I could probably get a better take off your pants jacket guitar tone than a lot of people in the world, and
Mm.
that's because I've gone through and I looked at all the photos of Tom's rectifier settings from when that amp was on the road with him when he had the rectifier,
Mm.
Dude Ranch era. And I know exactly how he set up the amp during then. And then I know exactly how he set up the amp when it came out of the Enema sessions, you
Yeah.
know?
Hmm.
And then I know exactly how he set up the amp when he went to the maroon one and came out of the take off your pants and jacket sessions.
So Rick, for you, what's next?
For
Uh,
me,
What's next for you? What can, the fans kind of expect from you if there's going to be any more? I know you kind of touched a little bit for the boxcar thing, but is there any other recreation videos that you're planning to do?
yeah, so I have a Sing the Starro video that I did that I'm gonna redo because I recently got a there's a wonderful guy named Julio at Chicago
Mm.
Amp Mods. And if you guys want a to get one step closer to a lot of these Jerry Finn, Rob Cavallo tones, he does the Dookie and SE lead mods. So I actually have a video, I don't know if you've seen it, but where I
Yeah.
went and recreated Brain Stew by Green Day, and that was utilizing a 1973 JMP that I had him modify for me with both of the mods into one amplifier. And it's a little bit. I've decided that I'm going to send him another amplifier because it's hard because I have to do two passes. So like to actually get the tone and blend them down is
To
a lot
get,
easier when
you
I
need
have,
to.
yeah, both
Yeah.
amps going at the same time. But you know, it sounds incredible. So for me, that opens up a whole world of stuff.
Mm.
One, I do have access to a diesel because of my mentor David. He has one, and I can also just go buy one. But the diesel and the white Marshall up top is a lot of tones from
Hmm.
the self-titled, untitled record. Um,
Mm.
and I'm excited to start exploring stuff like that. I propose a poll that we put up and say, amongst our three, we'll pick our three favorite tones.
Yeah.
And then we'll say, Internet, you pick one that you want us to recreate. And then, the three of us and Ryan, my guy over at Makebelie, will recreate that tone and then present it to him and come up with some, NAM profiles and Kemper profiles for everybody. You
That'd
know,
be sick. That'd be
That'd
awesome.
be cool.
Let's do
yeah,
it. Yeah.
I'd love to do
Rick,
that.
Rick, I can't honestly thank you enough for taking the time. I don't think, I mean, this video alone is already going to be over the hour, but even before that, spending almost an hour of me just picking your brain with stuff. So I truly, truly appreciate it. So thank you so, so much. And
Yeah, and
yeah, we'll definitely do a couple more of these videos. Is that sounds like fun.
Sure.
absolutely. And before I let you guys go, let's hop off and I want to ask you a couple questions too before you go.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Hey
Awesome.
guys, thank you so much. I'll link Rick's stuff in the bottom so you guys can take a look because I mean, I watch it quite a bit, just to watch how stuff gets done. So thank you again, Rick. We'll see you guys all in the next one.
Thanks, buddy.
Bye for now.